All right, let us pray. This is our last psalm class, so I'm going to recite a psalm. Come, let us sing out loud to the Lord. Let's praise a joyful shout to the rock of our salvation. Let's come before him with thanksgiving. Let's shout songs of joy to him. The Lord is a great God, a great king over all other gods. The earth's steps are in his hands. The mountain heights belong to him. The sea which he made is his, along with the dry ground which his own hands formed. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord our Maker. He is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hands. All right. Amen.
And
Amen.
is that a royal one? Was that a royal psalm?
That's Psalm 95, and it's not all of it. I'll read the rest of it right now. Here, I'll share my screen so you can see it too. It might help. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So this is Psalm 95. It continues, if only you'd listen to his voice right now. Don't harden your hearts like you did at Meribah, like you did when you were at Massa, in the wilderness when your ancestors tested me and scrutinized me, even though they'd already seen my acts. For 40 years, I despised that generation. I said, these people have twisted hearts. They don't know my ways. So in anger, I swore they will never enter my place of rest. It obviously shifts gears a decent amount right in the middle of it. I read it. If you ever do morning prayer, you may have recognized it from a different translation. Can you see my screen? I just switched to the morning prayer thing. Can you see a different screen, morning prayer?
Yes.
Sometimes I don't know if this changes.
Right too.
So at morning prayer, every day, there's a couple of options right at the beginning for what's called an invitatory psalm. And Psalm 95, verses 1 through 7, which is what I started with, is one of the options. The other one, which we'll also read, is Psalm 100. And generally, if you're doing morning prayer every day, you get to the point where you've memorized both of them because they come up continually. In Easter, it shifts to a selection from 1 Corinthians, Romans, and also 1 Corinthians called Christ Our Passover, which we use as well. But the interesting thing about that part that got cut off, the Meribah and Massa, where is it? Don't harden your hearts, that sort of thing. In Lent, if you're reading morning prayer in Lent, on Fridays and I think Wednesdays, they suggest that you read the whole thing rather than just the selection from 95. Anyway, I wanted to start with that because we've been reading through the Psalms for the last 2 months or so, and they appear regularly in our worship services, not just, on Sunday and holy days, there's always a Psalm selection that we read that's usually paired either with the Old Testament reading or with the gospel. But our prayer book, following in the line all the way back through Christian history, Eastern Church, Western Church, and also into Judaism, there's certain Psalms that are used all the time. And in the morning in Christianity, for daily office, Psalm 95 and Psalm 100 are used all the time. Has anybody ever done Compline in this group? So Compline is night prayer. If you go to daily office in the prayer book, you'll see that there's morning prayer, there's evening prayer, there's something called noonday, and then there's Compline. And Compline is night prayer, and same thing. Psalm 4 or Psalm 31 or Psalm 91 or Psalm 134 are read. All of them or one of them is read every day at Compline if you're doing night prayer. And they're thematically linked to this. Psalm 134 gives you a pretty clear reason why. Behold now, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, you that stand by night in the house of the Lord, lift up your hands in the holy place and bless the Lord. The Lord has made heaven and earth, bless you out of Zion. So this is another example of Psalms that are assigned to generally certain days and times and used all the time. The last chunk in our prayer book, at least, is noonday prayer. and we only have a couple of the traditional ones, but it's a chunk of 119. If you remember, 119 was the one that went on forever and ever and ever, and it's divided up into 8 parts. Those are very convenient, and throughout pretty much all of Christian and Judaism history have been used often as sort of chunks of worship or at particular times. And so this gives you one chunk of Psalm 119 for that. And the other 2 that are part of noonday prayer are let's see, are 121 and 126, and we're actually going to read those at among others. So what we're going to do today is read Psalms 120 through 124, which seems like a lot, but they're all in this category of like 7, 8, 6 verses long. So this is Psalm 121. We're going to read it again in a little bit, but it's, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. It is he who shall keep you safe. Thematically, the Lord shall watch over your going out and your coming in from this time forth forevermore. Thematically, this one could be read, in the day, at night, like it makes sense kind of all over the place, but it's this intro, and there's others like it. I lift up my eyes to the hills. There's a whole series of Psalms from 120 to 134 that are called either Psalms or songs of ascent, or of pilgrimage, or of going to the temple and that sort of thing. And it's believed by a lot of people that either they were written, or if not written specifically for, certainly compiled and lumped together to be Psalms that pilgrims might say going up to Jerusalem. Because if you've been there, and Patrice has, and Charlotte has, and I'm not sure who else is down there, and JD has, if you've been there, you know that Jerusalem is literally up on in the hills, and you also know that the temple itself and the Temple Mount is sort of on high ground on Mount Moriah in Jerusalem, and so you literally go up, and there traditionally there were 15 steps, like big steps going up into the actual temple. And there's 15 of these. So some people believe that you would, say one per step, sort of as you went up. And the tradition has continued, even though there's no temple anymore, that these are often the Psalms that if somebody is visiting Jerusalem or making a pilgrimage to Israel, these are sort of your go-to ones as you go. And for our groups, when I went with those of you on the Zoom that went with us to Israel back in 2018 and again in 2022. I don't know if everybody read them, but I did pass these Psalms along as things that you might consider bringing with you and praying as you flew over and when you were in the city. So we're going to read those today. But first, we're going to watch our last video and then talk a little bit about that and the videos, and then read these final Psalms. All right, let me share again with video and sound. Okay, hopefully this works. So you should be able to see that same Psalm, right? Can you see the Psalm? If I change it, can you see Professor Collins now? All right. If there's no sound, if there's no video, somebody interrupt, because I can't necessarily see you all.
Now, we tend to think of the Psalms as poetry. Now, they're sometimes called...
Can you still see it in big screen?
He's not moving. He's not moving.
All right, let me...
It's motionless. I hear the voice, but not see the, but the...
All right, let's try again. It doesn't like it when I shift to the large screen. All right, can you see the large screen now? Hopefully,
Yeah,
hopefully he's moving.
Oh.
Let's see.
picture just.
Yeah.
Now, we tend to think of the Psalms as poetry.
Is he moving?
Now,
Yes.
they're
Yes.
sometimes called it mizmor, would be a typical Hebrew word. So, it's something to be sung, something to go with musical accompaniment.
Many of the Psalms sort of say with a lyre or with other instruments.
And then there are some people who say there really is no such thing as Hebrew poetry.
Yeah.
Is it different?
Yeah, one of the things that we have to recognize is that poetry in the Bible sort of falls on a spectrum. There are prose utterances that read as poetic, and there can be poetry that actually reads very much like prose. Psalm 23 is a good example, where if you strung it out as in sentences as prose, it would actually read perfectly well, but it's presented to us in this body of poetic works, heightened speech. Sometimes people think Genesis 1 is almost poetic because it sort of has pattern and the difference, I suppose, as somebody said to us recently, there's a difference between prose and poetry in the Bible is like the difference between walking and dancing. Right? That is, it's much of the same stuff, but it's heightened, it's rhythmic.
There are some people who more or less dance when they walk anyway.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Well, I mean, so what we need to understand, I think, is that Hebrew poetry doesn't have many of the features that we commonly associate with poetry, more modern poetry. That is, it doesn't have rhyme. It doesn't, for the most part, have meter the way we think of it. It sometimes will have rhythm, but Hebrew poetry is really built on a structure that we call parallelism. Yeah. That is, often two-line phrases where the second line reiterates, repeats nuances, furthers, adjusts, somehow plays off of the first. Right? There's an A line and a B line, and the poetry is really made in the relationship between the two. And there are lots of different kinds of ways that relationship can be expressed. The A line can say, the Lord loves those who do well, and the B line can say, but the sinners he will punish, right? It's the same idea, but come at from two different sides. Or you can find often in the prophets, right, sort of a furthering. So for 3 things I will punish Israel, for 4 I will, destroy it, etc.
Yeah.
Where there's that relationship between the two.
Complementarity.
It can be. It certainly can, or it can be a restating with a particular nuance. So one of the examples that I like to use when I teach is the beginning of Psalm 24.
Okay, let me just read this. The earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. For he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers.
So you can see right there that the two verses come each one in 2 pairs. Right? The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. And then the second line, the world, using a different Hebrew word, and those who inhabit it. So is it the same thing? It is essentially the same notion.
In that particular case, it is essentially the same thing.
Although there are ways of reading the second half as nuancing. That is, what's the difference between earth and world? Generally, the word that's used there for world has to do with the inhabited world as opposed to the natural world. So you see this move from the earth, that is everything, and all of nature, everything that is in it, and also sort of our inhabited sense of world and all of the people who dwell in it. So there's a narrowing or a specifying, even as it's restating. And this is really the soul, I think, of how parallelism works. And there's all sorts of ways that parallelism can be expressed. It can be expressed in lexically, that is, word pairs, earth and world, for example, Lord and God, Israel and Jacob, these pairs that you see regularly. It can be expressed in syntax, which is very hard to get across in translation, or in theme. I mean, it's playful. It's very open. It's not rigid in the way that we think of many poetic structures. It's really, you can do a lot of different things, and it's just the fact that you're playing one line against the other that is where the poetry gets made.
So it is not simply a matter of saying the same thing in different words over and over again.
Right.
Although they do that on occasion too.
They do. It can feel that way when it can feel that way when it's read or read quickly.
Yeah.
One of the joys of reading this poetry in Hebrew is you get a far richer sense of how they're playing with the language.
Yeah.
In translation, it does often come across as repetitive.
Yeah.
But we should understand that it's not a fault. That's in fact right. It's not a bug. Right, it's the program.
But it can also expand the idea of the first line, as Jim Kugel would have said, and what is more?
Right.
It can go further.
Right.
But
in early investigations into Hebrew poetry, there was a notion of, well, we'll simply, right, either the second line says the same as the first, or it says the same thing the opposite way, or it continues it. And what Kugel did that was such a benefit, I think, to us, is he sort of said, let's not think of it in such highly categorized terms. The basic system throughout is A, and what's more, B. And that allows for all of the diversity of ways that can be expressed.
yes. Now, what role does aesthetics play in all of this? Is it important that the Psalms be beautiful, be pleasing?
I think that what's interesting is how much of that notion of aesthetics is sort of culturally conditioned. What do we think is beautiful? I mean, obviously there was a long period of English poetry where rhyme was, considered the height of sort of aesthetic when it comes to poetry. Now, I pick up the New Yorker and I can't understand quite why that's poetry, except that they broke the lines a certain way, but I'm not a modern poet. Aesthetics change. What I think is so interesting is, for a long time, the Psalms were held up as the sort of paradigm of beautiful poetry, right? As David's, sort of divinely inspired. So it was assigned the quality of aesthetic beauty by cultures that sort of valued the Psalms as scripture. Personally, I imagine, because we see poetry popping up all over the Bible at times of heightened speech, Jacob on his deathbed, Moses on his deathbed, the Israelites as soon as they escaped from the Egyptians, that they understood poetry to be, if not beautiful in the way that we think of it. I don't think there's ever any time when they use the word beauty or any word like it to describe their own literature, but they recognized it as heightened, as somehow a stronger language.
Yeah.
And in the Psalms, you see, as the appropriate language for addressing the deity, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Now, one of the aesthetic features that you get a number of times in the Psalter, and that is often puzzling to moderners, is the starting every line with the same letter, the acrostic.
Right, or moving through the alphabet. Right, the first line starts with in our case like A and then B.
What's the reason for doing that? It doesn't strike us as terribly aesthetic or beautiful.
Right, it seems almost artificial. It seems artificial in a way that I think we react badly against. People will suggest that it has some sort of mnemonic function, that it's to help remember.
Yeah.
Although, considering that the vast majority of Psalms are not acrostic, clearly there wasn't much of a problem with remembering those, so why should these be that way? One of the places that you see acrostics used, in fact, invariably, is in the Book of Lamentations, where every one of the 5 poems is an acrostic. And I think that we should think of this not in terms of attempt to memorize, but as an attempt to constrain, right? It gives the poet a natural sort of frame. I can only say so much. And so for the Lamentations, for example, these expressions of deep grief. So I could go on forever. My grief is so abundant. But if I give it this sort of formal structure, then it's constrained. I have a way of sort of naturally bounding this.
Right, so it's a discipline. As
It is.
one might say much the same about the sonnet, for example,
right.
how you compress what you have to say into this particular format. And I think part of the pleasure of it is that it's a little difficult.
Right.
And it's how well you overcome that obstacle that gives the pleasure.
Which is to say, and this is true for the Psalms generally, we need to remember that these are expressions of poetic craft.
Yeah.
Right? As much as we see their origins, going back to Gunkel, as much as we see their origins in an individual cultic setting, what we have are probably certainly the ones that made it in a certain sense, the ones that were recopied,
Yes.
the ones that achieved a certain literary art such that they could be held up as the sort of paradigmatic examples.
Yes.
The Psalms, each individual psalm is someone's, we don't know an author, we're not going to call the author David, but someone has put this together in a way that we should consider along with the poetry of Shakespeare or someone else, right? That they do have an art to them that can be appreciated independently of their setting.
Now, something we've touched on already in talking about some of the other Psalms is that they rely a lot on metaphorical speech. So that it's lions who are going to swallow us, or dogs are going to eat us up, or we're going to sink in mighty waters.
Yeah.
Why do people do that? Why can't people just say what they mean?
It is incredibly difficult to express emotion, certainly in the moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, emotion is often so personalized that, especially in these psalms that I think are intended to be for everyone. Anybody in a bad situation could take up a psalm.
Yeah.
And metaphors allow for covering a whole breadth of actual underlying scenarios.
It gets you away from the specifics.
It's universalizing.
Yeah.
It's universalizing. It's also heightened speech. I mean, where do we see metaphor? We see it in prophets, right? We see it in the Psalms. We don't see much metaphor in Leviticus, right? There's a sense in which this metaphor was understood as a way to lift one's speech out of its, as you say, out of its specific, out of its temporally bound context, and give it a form that everybody can sort of have a part in.
Yeah. So if then we say that the Psalms are poetry, what in fact are we saying about them? Does this make, when we read poetry, if indeed we read poetry, or for some of us, when we used to read poetry, I think we did it mainly for enjoyment.
Yeah, and I think that remains, at least for many, I think that remains the case, that the Psalms are authentically enjoyable, even when they talk about violence and vengeance or despair. The artistry of them comes through. Right? We can appreciate them as poems, as poetry, in the same way that we can appreciate Song of Songs as love poetry.
Yeah.
Although perhaps it's a little more distant from from say a Shakespearean sonnet. I mean, as you say, there is an aesthetic quality to the Psalms. They work on multiple levels. Is one of the reasons I think they are so beloved. I mean, you can appeal to them in authentic situations.
Yeah.
And as poetry, they give expression in what we tend to think of as a more sort of meaningful way than reading a letter
I think it should also be said that when people read poetry, I think they're also looking for insight. Mm-hmm. But generally, although there is such a thing as didactic poetry, you're not looking for a sermon. And I think, this is a dimension of scripture that maybe isn't appreciated often enough. That it too, perhaps, should be enjoyable and should give insight, even if it isn't always telling us properly what to do.
Yeah, it is. The Psalms really are, as we've said repeatedly, it is the part of the Bible that gives expression to the individual, right? That each person can find themselves in a psalm or in the Psalms generally. They can see in them a mechanism for expressing their reactions to their lives, their feelings, while still maintaining a generally sort of religious framework. This is much easier to find yourself in a psalm than in a ritual.
All righty. That's the last video. Okay, couple of things. Does everybody know what acrostic was? They mentioned that, but didn't.
No, I would love you to explain that, please.
So an acrostic
Sounds like a puzzle.
It kind of is. Acrostic poetry is, here's a perfect example of an acrostic poem, not a particularly good poem. Daisy's adorable, innocent, smiling yellow.
Okay, got it.
It's acrostic because the first letter, if you go down, if each word is a line, Daisy, adorable, innocent, smiling yellow spells what? Daisy. Right? So that's an acrostic poem. And this is just the nature of translation. If you've ever tried to read something that is originally in another language and poetic, anybody ever tried to read Dante or the Odyssey or the Iliad or anything like that, that's sort of a big narrative thing, but it's also a poem? A lot is lost in translation. And at least for me, the attempts often to keep the poetry and translate out the poetry turn the translation into something that's really difficult to read in English from a prose perspective. And when you don't try to do that and you just get the straight narrative, you lose all of the poetry. So you have this weird balance when you're dealing with translated poetry, where sometimes it's more doable than others. And you're left as a translator trying to keep some semblance of this is a poem and also present the meaning. So a couple of examples here. We'll use Psalm 23, actually. That's probably the easiest one, because I think pretty much everybody knows it. And we started with Psalm 23 as well. So no, let's do Psalm 100. So Psalm 100 is one of the ones we're going to read anyway. So let's look at this. So Sherry, can you read Psalm 100 right here?
A psalm of thanks. Shout triumphantly to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with celebration. Come before him with shouts of joy. Know that the Lord is God. He made us. We belong to him. We are his people, the sheep of his own pasture. Enter his gates with thanks. Enter his courtyards with praise. Thank him. Bless his name. Because the Lord is good, his loyal love lasts forever. His faithfulness lasts generation after generation.
So unless anybody disagrees with this, I don't find anything particularly poetic about this translation. You can see remnants of that doubling that they were talking about, lasts forever, generation to generation, right? Love, faithfulness. So you get this sort of is a repeated doublet in some way. There's another one here. He made us, we belong to him. We are his people, the sheep of his own pasture. It's three ways of saying something similar. Serve the Lord, come before him with shouts of joy, sort of is like that. Enter his gates with thanksgiving, enter his courtyards with praise. So you can see just from the basic translation, some remnants of Hebrew poetry here. But if there is other poetic stuff going on, we've lost basically all of it. From a strict translation, it's pretty easy to understand this, the meaning behind this. If I switch, can you see my screen still on morning prayer, which I'll jump to. Can you see? Is it moving around? Sort of.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the same poem, same psalm. Patrice, can you read the Jubilate, Psalm 100?
Be joyful in the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness and come before his presence with a song. Know this, the Lord himself is God. He himself has made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving. Go into his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and call upon his name. For the Lord is good. His mercy is everlasting, and his faithfulness endures from age to age.
So
Okay.
much better.
Right. Well, so this is the right to morning prayer psalm. If you open up a prayer book and go to the Psalms in the back, you'll get the same version, and it's intentionally translated so that it feels Episcopalian. It feels like our language, Anglican. It feels more poetic across the board, and it's the same psalm, but it's just presented in a more poetic translation. If I go back and we go to Rite One, which is the
It's
thee and
like
thy stuff.
the difference between reading Chaucer in Old English and a modern version
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, okay, this is the Rite One version. James, can you read this Jubilate in Rite One?
Jubilate, Psalm 100. Be joyful in the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness and come before his presence with a song. Be ye sure that the Lord, he is God. It is he that hath made us and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Well, go your way into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him and speak good of his name. For the Lord is gracious, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth from generation to generation.
Okay, same psalm. This is a different translation. It's older. You can tell obviously by the ye's and the haths and that sort of thing. But this is actually from a different psalter. In the older prayer books, 28 and going before, all the way back to the 1662 prayer book, they used a psalter called the Coverdale Psalter. And it was designed to be the Anglican Church of England Psalter, and that spread across the world. And it, like the King James, which has its own Psalter, for many people became kind of the go-to poetry. And when our prayer book was updated in 1979 with the newer translations, there was a sense that some of the poetry in the Psalms had been lost. And at least in the Rite One services, these Coverdale Psalms still are there. So you still get it. And so there's a little bit more poetry in this. We did an experiment at the beginning of all this with Psalm 23. And I think routinely everybody hated the Common English Bible translation. And then there was the Rite Two translation in our prayer book. And then there was the King James and the Coverdale. And I'll show you where you can find some of those in the prayer book. If you go to pastoral offices and then go to burial Rite One, you will discover that there's old versions of a whole bunch of Psalms in there. And what we're going to read actually is not Psalm 23, but we're going to read an old version of Psalm 121, and get a sense of that poetry. And then we're going to shift and read the 121 to 134 and finish out. Alban, can you read 121 in the Coverdale translation, which is in front of you? You got to unmute though.
I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh even from the Lord, who has made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved, and he that keepeth thee will not sleep. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself is thy keeper. The Lord is thy defense upon thy right hand, so that the sun shall not burn thee by day, neither the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. Yea, it is even he that shall keep thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth forevermore.
Great. So one of the features, I think, for most of us of poetic language in English, it's not all poetry by any means, but one of the features that often people think, oh, it's poetic, is archaic language. And some of that is the haths and the ye's and that sort of thing, but and the comeths and that sort of thing. But it's also words being kind of shifted in different ways, and certain phrasings of things, like he will not suffer thy foot to be moved, and he that keepeth thee will not sleep. I doubt most of us would speak like that, right? Even if we dropped the these and the thys. My guess is he will not suffer thy foot to be moved is not how we would say something similar. And we're going to read that right now. This was the psalm I read earlier. But if you go to the Psalter, and we'll jump to 121 conveniently. We'll read this quickly. Barbara, can you read 121?
I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. It is he who shall keep you safe. The Lord shall watch over your going out and your coming in from this time forth forevermore.
Great. Okay, so which is more poetic? I'll read it from this translation. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved, and he that keepeth thee will not sleep. Or he will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Most likely, the older version sounds more poetic. Now, just for a jarring experience, Charlotte, can you read Psalm 121 from the Common English Bible?
A pilgrimage song. I raise my eyes towards the mountains. Where will my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God won't let your foot slip. Your protector won't fall asleep on the job. No, Israel's protector never sleeps or rests. The Lord is your protector. The Lord is your shade right beside you. The sun won't strike you during the day, neither will the moon at night. The Lord will protect you from all evil. God will protect your very life. The Lord will protect you on your journeys, whether going or coming, from now until forever from now.
I don't find this particularly poetic. I could be wrong. The only poetry in there is other than the content is that it keeps saying protector again and again and again and again. This, though, just doesn't ring as well. God won't let your foot slip. Your protector won't fall asleep on the job, versus he will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Right? Like, this newish translation is far more poetic and closer to the older one than this very new translation. But this Bible's trying to do something different. This Bible, and this is the thing about coming up with a translation of the Bible, is they were trying to be very blunt with what the text said. And often that comes at the expense of things like the poetry. It's particularly jarring in the Psalter and in places like Lamentations. It was less jarring in the prophets, right? We read Isaiah from this translation. And one of the advantages of this is that it almost strips away the poetry so you can get the meaning much easier in English. But you lose a lot of the poetry, which loses a big chunk of why it was memorable in the first place. Because in Hebrew, and I don't know Hebrew very well at all, I barely know it, but in Hebrew, as the professor said, you're not just getting poetic images, poetic language, you're also getting poetic plays on syntax and grammar, which is possible in English if you are a really good poet. And you can sort of say, oh, I see, mourn and mourn, right? You can get things like that in English that match up, that are the same words, and it's poetry because the words are the same. Once you translate that out, it completely is gone. And things, if you translate mourning into French and mourning as in weeping into French, my guess is they're not the same sounding words, right? So you end up with things like that in poetry in one language that you lose as you translate it. So this Common English Bible translation that we've mostly been using is great at getting the understanding of what the text is saying. It's absolutely terrible at being poetic. And so it's not a great translation if you want to be like, I want to pray the Psalms. I would not recommend going to this translation. I would recommend opening up your prayer book and reading some of the Psalms there. And on that note, the last little thing before we keep reading a few more Psalms is I called this section from 120 all the way through 134 Psalms or songs of ascent. Talked about how you might read them going up to Jerusalem. There's 15 of them, the 15 steps of the temple, that sort of thing. You get a sense in a poetic version how they might be very memorable. The themes in them are things that you might, have a favorite or two of this group of Psalms. And they are very poetic in our prayer book. They are not very poetic in this Common English Bible translation and are far less memorable. So as we read them, and in our prayer book, it won't say a pilgrimage song or that sort of thing, but as we read them, I hope that you get a sense of some of the poetry of this collection of pilgrimage songs that are in our prayer book. They're some of my favorites, and that's what I wanted to end with. So we're going to jump to that and read. We've already read 121, but so we'll read 120 and keep going. Let's see, start at the beginning. At least in my listing, I've got Sherry first. Can you read 120?
When I was in trouble, I called to the Lord. I called to the Lord and he answered me. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips and from the deceitful tongue. What shall be done to you, and what more besides, O you deceitful tongue? The sharpened arrows of a warrior along with hot glowing coals. How hateful it is that I must lodge in Meshech and dwell among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I had to live among the enemies of peace. I am on the side of peace, but when I speak of it, they are for war.
Great. This doesn't seem like a pilgrimage song at first, but it's the first in a collection. And as we go through, it gives you a sense of, you get a sort of narrative throughout them. If anything, this is, my life is not great right now. I called on the Lord. I wish I lived somewhere else because I live in Meshech and among the people of Kedar and that sort of thing. So we jump into the next one, and which we just read, but it's worth reading again. Jim, can you read 121?
Yes. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From where is my help to come? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved, and he who watches over you will not fall asleep. Behold, he who keeps watch over Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord himself watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand, so that the sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve you from all evil. It is he who shall keep you safe. The Lord shall watch over you, your going out and your coming in, from this time forth forevermore.
So you get a sense in this one, okay, I'm in trouble in the last Psalm. I'm still sort of in trouble in this one, but I'm looking towards the hills, which is Jerusalem and the temple, and we keep going. Barbara, can you read 122?
I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Now our feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built as a city that is at unity with itself, to which the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, the assembly of Israel, to praise the name of the Lord. For there are the thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls and quietness within your towers. For my brethren and companions' sake, I pray for your prosperity. Because of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek to do you good.
So now you're in Jerusalem, right? Can you see the path that you've gotten? Let's keep going. Who's up? Patrice, can you read 123?
To you I lift up my eyes, to you enthroned in the heavens. As the eyes of servants look to the hands of their master, and the eyes of a maid to the hand of her mistress, so our eyes look to the Lord our God, until he show us his mercy. Have mercy upon us, O Lord, have mercy, for we have had more than enough of contempt, too much of the scorn of the indolent rich, and of the derision of the proud.
So on its own, this has nothing to do with Jerusalem or the temple, but if you're sort of following the pattern, you've made it into Jerusalem, you're in the temple, and now you look up, and that's where you encounter God. Does that make sense? I lift up my eyes to God in the heavens. All right, let's keep going. Charlotte, can you read 124?
If the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel now say, if the Lord had not been on our side when enemies rose up against us, then would they have swallowed us up alive in their fierce anger toward us? Then would the waters have overwhelmed us and the torrent gone over us? Then would the raging waters have gone right over us? Blessed be the Lord. He has not given us over to be a prey for their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowler. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth.
Great. So at this point now it shifts. It's not overtly looking up or anything like that. It's simply, if you were putting a short psalm into this collection, that's kind of where we get right now. It's okay. We're getting short psalms that generally have a theme about God being on our side. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, that sort of thing. So it becomes,
here's some information.
When it becomes overtly, not about pilgrimage anymore, and it still has the attribution at the beginning of the psalm, a song of ascent or a pilgrimage song, you're like, I don't understand what this has to do with a pilgrimage, but it works with the larger chunk of this, so to speak. All right, Albin, can you 125?
Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved, but stands fast forever. The hills stands about Jerusalem. So does the Lord stands round about his people from this time forth forevermore. The scepter of the wicked shall not hold sway over the land allotted to the just, so that the just shall not put their hands to evil. Show your goodness, O Lord, to those who are good, and to those who are true of heart. As for those who turn aside to crooked ways, the Lord will lead them away with the evildoers, but peace be upon Israel.
Great. This one's pretty obvious. It's Mount Zion, Jerusalem, hills, that sort of thing. So it's something, again, it's in this context of I've left, or I would like to leave, a place where I can't find God quite as overtly, and I want to be in this wonderful place, Jerusalem. And so it's equating the trust of the Lord to the firmness of the hills that stand around Jerusalem and that sort of thing. But it would make sense in this context of sort of a pilgrimage type of psalm that you might pray when you get to Jerusalem. This is one of my favorites. Who hasn't read? Patrice, are you up? Am I right about that?
JD hasn't read.
JD, are you able to read? He's got no video. He told me yesterday that he might not be able to read because if he has no video.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm on my phone, so I can't read the small print.
All right.
Sorry.
I can read.
Patrice is up. All right.
When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, then will we like those who dream. Then was our mouth filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are glad indeed. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses of the Negev. Those who sowed with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves.
Great. So, linked to pilgrimage, the only thing here is it's got Zion and that sort of thing. But it's on its own, it's a great psalm about, it's those who sowed with tears will reap with songs of joy. This is one of those that could be used at a funeral. It could be used in the middle of a war, right? Like it could be used at any kind of very trying time. And it looks back to a time when fortune was restored and there was laughter, and looks ahead to a time when something like that might be coming again, and that those who go out weeping will come again with joy. Let's keep going. Charlotte, can you read 127?
Unless the Lord builds the house, their labor is in vain who build it. Unless the Lord watches over the city, in vain the watchman keeps his vigil. It is in vain that you rise so early and go to bed so late. Vain, too, to eat the bread of toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Children are a heritage from the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is a gift. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. He shall not be put to shame when he contends with his enemies in the gate.
Great. Okay, this is in that pilgrimage psalm chunk, but it has historically been used. Can anybody guess when it might have been used in day-to-day life?
Baptisms.
The guard.
Birth, right? It's one of those things that might be prayed while you're awaiting the birth of a child, right? Or something like that. So there's things like that. It could be used literally if you're building a house for your new family, right? Or something like that. So it's got specific contexts. And how does it link to these pilgrimage songs other than that it's short and maybe references the house being the Lord's temple and that sort of thing? Not so much, but it does and the watching over the city and that sort of thing. But it's more life in the city and life in general. But it's in this context of short, mostly sweet psalms that you can kind of fire off and pray at different points in life. Okay, who's up? I'm not sure who's up. Sherry, I think you're up. 128. If you're here, she might have had to go. Oh, no, you're here. Okay, Sherry, you're up.
Happy are they who fear the Lord and who follow in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of your labor. Happiness and prosperity shall be yours. Your wife shall be like a fruitful vine within your house, your children like olive shoots round about your table. The man who fears the Lord shall thus indeed be blessed. The Lord bless you from Zion, and may you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. May peace be upon Israel.
All right, same kind of thing. You can imagine a birthday party or, something like that. And obviously, why is this one put here? Because thematically, it's pretty close to the previous one, right? So you might say, oh, what's the next one? And read this and sort of go from there to there. And again, it's in this context of these sort of pilgrimage psalms, in part because Jerusalem is mentioned and that sort of thing. A theme in a lot of these is Jerusalem or going up or peace on Israel, that sort of thing. All right. Barbara, can you read 129?
Greatly have they oppressed me since my youth, let Israel now say. Greatly have they oppressed me since my youth, but they have not prevailed against me. The plowman plowed upon my back and made their furrows long. The Lord, the righteous one, has cut the cords of the wicked. Let them be put to shame and thrown back, all those who are enemies of Zion. Let them be like grass upon the housetops, which withers before it can be plucked, which does not fill the hand of the reaper, nor the bosom of him who binds the sheaves, so that those who go by say not so much as, the Lord prosper you. We wish you well in the name of the Lord.
Great. Okay, the only link I can think of is youth and children here, but it cut. So but we're back into sort of a similar song of complaint that we've gotten throughout the Psalter, and I think again one of the reasons that these are all plunked together, if you've noticed, they've all been 6, 7, or 8 verses, pretty much, right? They're a part of them is that maybe they link thematically, maybe not, but they're all about the same length. And if you remember Psalm 119, which we didn't read ever in this class, you read it on your own if you wanted to early on, but Psalm 119, which is before all of these, is a whole string of 8 verse, a whole alphabet of 8 verse little psalmettes that are together. And so this kind of follows on those. All right, this is a famous one that we've actually read earlier. Charlotte, can you read this one?
Out of the depths I have called to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears consider well the voice of my supplication. If you, Lord, were to note what is done amiss, O Lord, who could stand? For there is forgiveness with you, therefore you shall be feared. I wait for the Lord, my soul waits for him. In his word is my hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, wait for the Lord, for with the Lord there is mercy. With him there is plenteous redemption, and he shall redeem Israel from all of their sins.
Okay, I'm going to keep going just because we've got a couple left and I'm running out of time. James, can you read 131?
131. Yeah, Domine non est. O Lord, I am not proud. I have no haughty looks. I do not occupy myself with great matters or with things that are too hard for me. But I still my soul and make it quiet, like a child upon its mother's breast. My soul is quieted within me. O Lord, wait upon the Lord. O Israel, wait upon the Lord from this time forth forevermore.
Great. Okay, this continues the theme of waiting from the last one. So we've gone through, times of trial into different types of waiting. Who's up? Alban, can you read 132?
Lord, remember David and all the hardships he endured, how he swore an oath to the Lord and vowed a vow to the mighty one of Jacob. I will not come under the roof of my house, nor climb up into my bed. I will not allow my eyes to sleep, nor let my eyelids slumber, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling for the mighty one of Jacob. The ark, we heard it was in Ephratah. We found it in the field of Jerim. Let us go to God's dwelling place. Let us fall upon our knees before his footstool. Arise, O Lord, into your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness. Let your faithful people sing with joy. For your servant David's sake, do not turn away the face of your anointed. The Lord has sworn an oath to David. In truth, he will not break it. Son, the fruit of your body will I set upon your throne. If your children keep my covenant and my testimonies that I shall teach them, their children will sit upon your throne forevermore. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired her for his habitation. This shall be my resting place forever. Here will I dwell, for I delight in her. I will surely bless her provisions and satisfy her poor with bread. I will clothe her priest with salvation, and her faithful people will rejoice and sing. There will I make the horn of David's flourish. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed. As for his enemies, I will clothe them with shame. But as for him, his crown will shine.
So thus far, this is an anomaly in terms of its length, but it sums up a lot of the themes that we've been reading about children and Zion and temple and that sort of thing. And it does it from David's perspective. And this section of the Psalter is winding down, and it sort of acts as a kind of summary of everything we've just read in some sense. And you'll see that the next couple are a little shorter. Who's up? James, can you read 133?
133, yes. Oh, how good and pleasant it is when brethren live together in unity. It is like fine oil upon the head that runs down upon the beard of Aaron, and runs down upon the collar of his robe. It is like the dew of Hermon that falls upon the hills of Zion. For there the Lord has ordained the blessing, life forevermore.
Great. So this one's about unity, which makes sense with people coming together into Jerusalem, and also references Aaron, the original sort of high priest. And our last one, Sherry, can you finish us off with 134?
Sorry, I've got a chat up on. Okay. Behold now, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, you that stand by night in the house of the Lord, lift up your hands in the holy place and bless the Lord. The Lord who made heaven and earth, bless you out of Zion.
Great. So this is the last of these pilgrimage psalms. And this would be, so you've made it to Jerusalem, you've made it to the temple. This is your sort of good night prayer. And that's this section there. If you're ever looking for psalms to sort of pray, not a bad place to start is 120 to 134. They give you they're all short enough and clear enough that they're good kind of on your own type of psalms, and they are used fairly regularly in different aspects of worship or life, as I think is pretty clear once you're reading. So that's the end of the Psalms. Our next class is going to be on Daniel starting next week. And if you want to read the book of Daniel between now and then, that might help you. There's a terrible TV show called The Book of Daniel. I don't recommend it. So that's not a substitute. But any questions or final comments about the Psalms?
Forgive me, and I don't want to belabor this. Is probably an aside that's was at least relevant for me when it had to do with the substance of God as protector, which I don't relate to it necessarily that way. But I don't know if anyone saw the Grammy Awards where Beyonce thanked God for protecting her. It was unusual because usually there's gratitude. So I just felt it was, reading the Psalm today, describing God as our protector from evil, helped me a little bit understand that role that God plays, that I usually don't look at him that way. And maybe that's because I'm ignorant, which probably is the case.
No, but that's a great reference. And they come into, whether she was quoting that or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting, confluence of pop culture and Bible study. So I think that's a great observation. Yeah. Anything else?
I really enjoyed this section, Matt. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. The Psalms are nice. This particular chunk is nice too. So these are some of my favorites are in here. I lift up my eyes to the hills, those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, that sort of thing, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. There's some really good chunks in this, and you don't get them as often on Sunday, but if you do noonday prayer or whatever, you get them all the time. So it's kind of they get into your rota in other ways. Anything else? All right. God bless. We will reconvene next week with Daniel, and there's videos by guess who, the same two professors. So if you got to like them before, we'll get to see how much they've aged. I think they did Daniel after they did, or how much younger they were. And my hope is it's in HD. It's not